Ladies and gentlemen, it is so good to be back. Today, I have probably my favorite video that I've done all offseason, maybe my favorite video that I've done ever so far, and I really hope it excites you as much as it does me. What I am doing today is ranking the top 10 wide receivers for the upcoming 2026 rookie class. I'm giving everything you need to know and more, everything you want to know. I have prospect grades for all these guys that really only need final draft capital, of course, to be fully complete. We don't know that just yet. We're about a month and a half away. Obviously, we won't know any of that for sure, but I am using mock draft database projection for now as that input. My prospect model combines both an analytical approach and a film-based approach that I really think is a good balance for just about anything you are looking for. Like whatever you lean towards, I feel like I am a good median for that. I am really excited to finally release who my top 10 guys in the class are, or for Dynasty. I kind of had a little bit of trouble finishing the rankings because the end gets a little bit harder to differentiate between a couple of guys, but put in a ton of time watching film, crunching the numbers. Like I said, there was a couple of guys that I think just barely missed the list that I was struggling with and that I will probably maybe mention at the very end. But overall, I think the list came out pretty darn well. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right into my number one guy. But first, I'm going to give a little bit of a spiel about what metrics go into my model and how it spit out the numbers that it did and the grades that it did as well. So I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. I know a lot of you are super eager to see where the players are ranked. But I do think the information that goes in this model is super important. It may give you some extra insight, some extra context on where guys may be ranked and why guys are ranked, ahead of who, just based on, how the grades came out. But my prospect model for wide receivers goes all the way back to 2015, and that includes anyone drafted inside the top 200 picks of the NFL draft. It takes four primary inputs that are weighed a little differently. The biggest and most important one is draft capital. It comes out to 45% of the overall grade, a pretty big chunk, but it is easily the biggest indicator of how good a prospect can or will be in the NFL, especially as a dynasty or fantasy asset. It gives you a good idea of what kind of opportunity that they may or may not receive early on in their careers. We all know the more draft capital a team invests in a player will likely result in a more overall opportunity at the beginning of their careers. A player selected in the first round is, of course, going to get more run than a guy who goes in the second, third round, day three. Obviously, that's just how it is. Secondly, we have two variables that are weighed just about equally, that being film score and production score. Like I said, I like to blend these two together because it helps shed some light on a prospect who may have sat behind multiple prospects in their collegiate career and had to wait their turn. We all know that NIL has changed a bit. It pretty much changed the game completely, and there's a lot more guys returning for their senior season. So it isn't as frowned upon as it used to be. So I wanted to, input that into my model and have that be a variable. At the same time, I think it's also important to reward prospects who produce early on in their college career and declare early. To do this as accurately as possible, I take a player's prorated yards per team pass attempts for their best season and use a multiplier for both strength of schedule and what age they broke out in that season and calculate that to get a final yards per team pass attempt based off of those numbers. This really helps create a balance and doesn't overrate a player who went to a small school and put up big numbers versus bad competition, and properly props up players who played against elite competition throughout their career. For the film grade, I use a scale based off Lance Zierlein's grading system that you can see here below. It ranges from about 5.5, which is a priority undrafted free agent, and goes all the way up to an 8, which is a perfect prospect, is what Lance Zierlein calls it. A small tweak that I made was I only made the grades go up to a 7.2. That is my perfect prospect in my grading system. I have only been watching film for maybe the past 2 years, so a lot of the previous grades are based off of Lance's grades and the grade that he gave those prospects. So if you're unfamiliar with Lance Zierlein, he is one of the better talent evaluators out there and has been doing it for a very, very long time. He isn't perfect, of course, but neither am I. So I felt like that was a pretty good mix there. It wasn't a bad idea to add in his past prospect grades on guys. The last variable I use is teammate grade, though, which is weighted at just 5%, so nothing too crazy. Maybe a little bit of boost if a guy is played with multiple first round picks, like a lot of the Ohio State guys. Take a look. It takes a look at the talent that a prospect played with throughout their college career and gives a rating on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being not very good at all, and 10 being the best possible. If you're at all familiar with JJ Zachariason, I have definitely drawn a ton of inspiration, from his model and taken some tips to better help my process. He is, in my opinion, the best at assessing prospects on an analytical level, taking data and making objective conclusions based off of it. So it felt right to follow similar steps that he took to grade out prospects. Overall, though, I don't think my model is perfect. Of course, I don't think any model is perfect, but I think it does a solid job of projecting what a prospect's best range of outcomes are on a both analytical level and film level, of course, while also weighing draft capital as the most important variable of all, which I think is something that a lot of people should realize. A lot of this is probably super nerdy. I get it. So I think it's probably time to jump right into the rankings. A lot of fun prospects to talk about, and I'm super excited to jump into things with you guys, starting with my number one wide receiver for the 2026 rookie class. My number one wide receiver for the 2026 rookie class, both in my model and in my film grades, according to my film grade, is Carnell Tate. Yes, we have yet again another Ohio State wide receiver at the top. I personally have two other guys in the same tier as him, based on where I would rank them in rookie drafts, where I would take them in rookie drafts, where I would advise people taking them in rookie drafts. But we'll get to them here in a bit. But if I had to choose one, just regardless of landing spot, anything else, it would be Carnell Tate. When it comes to his tape specifically, I was floored by what I saw. His ability to beat you at every area of the field is incredibly impressive. And more than anything, his ability to push defensive backs vertically and win down the field stands out the most. His ball skills, his hands, they're off the charts. I don't believe he dropped a single pass in 2025, and he only had like 5 total drops on 161 targets in his entire career at Ohio State. He's also great working against zone, which is a bonus for someone who plays primarily on the perimeter like he does. And I think that it probably signifies that he can play a little bit more around the formation, play flanker, maybe play a little bit of slot. One weakness that I think is very valid on his tape is his lack of creativity after the catch. It's not anything bad, but he is limited in that aspect, and I think that is probably the one hole in this game and the one that we could probably want him to develop in the NFL. The recruiting stuff doesn't matter too much to me coming out of high school, but he was a 5-star player coming out, so the pedigree, the expectation was there from the beginning. As we all know, he has played with some crazy talent at Ohio State. Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka were all there when Tate was there. And of course, we all know his teammate, Jeremiah Smith, who's considered a generational prospect in his own right, probably by almost everybody on the planet, unless you're insane. Some of the talent there can explain why he truly didn't break out or produce some like high level numbers until his true junior season. I haven't seen as many people knock him as much as I thought. I think people are pretty much aware at this point that some of the guys coming out of Ohio State had to wait their turn, and Tate was no different. So yeah, Tate has just about everything you're looking for, if you're a big film watcher or you'd like to evaluate prospects in that lens. I just like to do a little bit of both of my prospects. Numbers are good to look at, but there is usually always important context to be aware of in just about any prospect's profile. So I think it's important, to look at all the moving pieces, especially when you're looking at a guy like Tate. While Tate is a very good prospect in my eyes, I would be lying if I, said he was anywhere near perfect. Although I believe he is currently the 11th best prospect in my wide receiver model, a lot of that can be heavily carried by the, potential draft capital that he's expected to receive. His production score is easily the biggest weakness at 68.9, although that is kind of at the top of the class. Every single one of the top 10 prospects or the 10 prospects listed ahead of them all time have at least an 80 score there. So that is definitely the one variable bringing him down, from that generational tier with Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., Amari Cooper, Jamar Chases of the world. Kind of like I mentioned though earlier, I think his analytical profile and production score was heavily contributed to him playing behind multiple first round picks. It's true. He was never the number one on his own team, but I think it was just due to circumstance, in my opinion. I don't think a lot of the guys, play opposite of a true alpha in college like Jeremiah Smith. Tate had to deal with it twice. Marvin Harrison Jr., Jeremiah Smith. Marvin Harrison Jr. was a top 4 pick. I believe Jeremiah Smith probably may be taken around the same range or even higher. Targets come your way a little bit less in that case. And in my opinion, I do believe that Tate has the chops to be a number one wide receiver on whatever team he goes to. I think he can eventually develop into one of the best players at his position based on what I saw on film, based on, kind of what I've seen, just breaking down his analytical profile. He has that kind of upside. And I think the NFL probably agrees, especially considering where he's likely to be taken. He's consistently mocked inside the top 10 and the first wide receiver off the board. I think he's probably going to be the wide receiver off the board or the first wide receiver off the board. I think it's probably going to come down to him and Mekhi Lemon. But yeah, I couldn't agree more with NFL's assessment, and he is my wide receiver 1. To get people a little more excited, if you couldn't already tell, his closest comps in the model are guys like CeeDee Lamb and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Their careers have turned out pretty well this far, I would say. Just for fun as well, I came up with a ceiling, median, and floor real-life comparisons for him, just based on, where I have him ranked. My comp for him is a T. Higgins plus at his absolute ceiling. A lot of people view T. Higgins as a wide receiver too, but of course he plays next to possibly the best wide receiver in all of football and probably one of the best wide receivers we've seen like the past 30 years, especially when it comes to like caliber of prospect that he was when he came out. A plus version of Teagan's is quite the compliment, in my opinion. My medium comp is Brian Thomas Jr. I realize he has lost some of his shine from his rookie season, but I think, more of the version that we saw from his magical rookie year is a medium comp, like with the Jaguars. I think that Brian Thomas Jr., yes, I understand that he's not viewed in the best light right now, but he was great in his rookie year. I think he's going to bounce back. But yeah, Brian Thomas Jr. is more what I view the median comp for Carnell Tate. I think it's a very, very, very good median type outcome. The floor for Tate is actually a player ranked right next to him in the model, and that is Devontae Parker. I think that's quite a good floor in my opinion. Parker was a solid play for fantasy and had some really, really good years in Miami. All this aside, though, I think that Carnell Tate, like I mentioned throughout this entire first part here, I think he's an excellent prospect. He's my wide receiver one. Of course, he checks out on tape. He comes from a machine school that pumps out wide receivers, stud wide receivers, seemingly every single season. He's projected to go inside the top 10 by most NFL analysts. I think it's hard to argue. I am not saying there aren't holes to poke in his profile, but projecting him is about as easy as anyone in my eyes, especially when it comes to size and speed. If I'm sitting at the 102 in any of my rookie drafts, I am going to be pressing the button on Tate 9 times out of 10, pretty much regardless of landing spot. There will be times where I take one of the two guys or one of the other two guys in the same tier as him, but that is probably mostly for diversity's sakes and just trying to mix up my profile a little bit. Tate is someone you should all be excited about, regardless of the shade the 2026 wide receiver class gets. And like I mentioned a million times, Carnell Tate is my wide receiver one, and in my eyes, I don't think it is particularly close. Moving on, I just want to point out something quick, and I'm probably going to spend a little bit more time on the top 6 to 7-ish guys more than the ones who are ranked a little bit lower, like 8, 9, 10. This is a pretty good wide receiver class, and especially so at the top. So I feel like it's necessary and probably what people want more than anything. My number 2 wide receiver in this class, though, is Mekhi Lemon, wide receiver out of USC, checking in with an 81.7 prospect grade, right on par with guys like Drake London, Tet McMillan, Emeka Egbuka. There are some worries about how he would test at the combine or where he would measure in at the combine, actually. And he measured in, he checked out well, 5'11, 192. That will absolutely do. There's a lot of people who have him as their wide receiver one, and honestly, I wouldn't really argue with him much as I love Carnell Tate. The dude checks about every single box in terms of analytics, film, projected draft capital. He's viewed very, very highly among the NFL prospects, among NFL teams in general. It's fair to point out that there were reports after the combine that he interviewed terribly, and if you aren't up to date on this, when he was at the podium answering questions, he was causing quite the stir, I guess. I advise everyone to check it out. It's actually pretty funny. I actually found it pretty entertaining more than anything. In terms of it hurting his stock, though, I'm not sure if I believe any of that smoke. We see stuff like this all the time, false alarms. He's a really good wide receiver prospect, and I'm sure that teams would love if he fell into their lap because of questionable character concerns. I mean, we see this all the time. Either way, I don't think he falls outside of the top 18 to 20 picks, and I think he is in play to go in the top 10. I really, really do. I think he's in play to be the wide receiver one off the board. Like I mentioned earlier, I think he's in play to go in the top 10. Absolutely incredible year in 2025 with USC. He finished with just short of 1,200 yards receiving, 11 touchdowns. He won the Biletnikoff Award, which goes to the best wide receiver in the country. When I dove into his film, I was also pretty blown away. For someone that is 5'11 and less than 200 pounds, he is an absolute dog at the catch point and wins contested catches at a ridiculous rate. It kind of makes no sense, and that is why I probably think that people have questions about his game translating gracefully to the NFL. Those questions are absolutely valid, but I think everything else checks out on him on tape. His ability after the catch is really, really good. He is a nice creator. He has good vision. He makes defenders miss in the open field. He had north of a 25% missed tackles force per reception in 2025, which is at the top of the class. He is also he has very fine separation skills, despite some people's concern about that area of his game. And he really knows how to find soft spots in zone, which I love to see, especially being out of the spot. Is going to be incredibly important if he is going to be primary slot flanker in the NFL. I don't know how much he's going to play on the outside. I think he probably does play more slot than any other position at the next level, but I do think he has the ability to play a little bit outside if he is asked to do so. His play strength gives me the confidence that he will be fine against NFL defensive backs. I see a lot of people comparing him to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I see those shades in his game, and I think that is probably a good ceiling for him if he reaches his absolute peak and he's able to operate in a system that allows him to use his strengths optimally and like weaponize him in the best way possible. The comparison that I thought made the most sense though was like a Golden Tate plus type of player as a medium comp. No, this is someone people may have forgotten, but he hasn't played in the NFL since 2020 and it isn't as fun as a comparison as Amon-Ra St. Brown, but Dude, Golden Tate was such a good player. He had multiple seasons of like 90 plus catches. If you are unfamiliar, just go check out his highlights. The dude was a maniac. He was really, really good after the catch as well. My lone comparison is kind of bleak. I get it. That's Jahan Dotson, kind of a similar archetype that just never translated to the NFL level. I think Lemon is a much better prospect, and I doubt he ever ends up like Jahan Dotson, but it's fair to point out that there are some downside scenarios for all these prospects, especially since none of them are anywhere close to flawless in like no brainer like bets at the position. I think that it is fine to have a downside comp like Jahan Dotson. I wouldn't panic too much. I think that Mekhi Lemon is going to be a fine fantasy asset in Dynasty for a many years. Finish up my thoughts on Lemon. I really do think he absolutely warrants the consideration to be the wide receiver one off the board in rookie drafts and also in the NFL draft. I project that he probably goes between the 102, 103, maybe 104 come April. And once we know landing spots of these prospects, we'll get like a more of a clear vision of where he's probably going to go. His production in his final season does some heavy lifting for a lot of people. And then the way the NFL is trending, makes Lemon's archetype even more appealing in fantasy football. Just take a look at the aforementioned Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Puka Nacua, all similar players that are not elite athletes, but do everything else you want and, before and after the catch. I love Lemon as much as the next person, but I do think Carnell Tate edges him out just slightly. I know I just mentioned that it's probably not close, but I was probably being a little not realistic about that, I guess. And my prospect model, my prospect grades, just gave me the confidence to push Carnell Tate ahead of him. Lemon is awesome, though, in my opinion. Just don't overthink him when you're on the clock in rookie drafts. Despite what a lot of people may be saying about him, I do think he is pretty darn safe, overall as a prospect in Dynasty and very much projectable, especially in that slot role wherever he goes. Next up, we have the last wide receiver that I think deserves a spot in that tier with Mekhi Lemon and Carnell Tate, and that is Jordan Tyson, wide receiver out of Arizona State. Just barely edged out by Mekhi Lemon in terms of prospect grade with an 81.1 score. His closest model comps are pretty much the same. McMillan, Ekbuka, Drake London. One important thing to point out in Tyson's profile, and probably the best thing to point out in Tyson's profile, is he has the highest production score out of everyone in the class by a wide margin at 83.3. This is right on par with some of the early, some of the big breakouts, some of the guys who had probably some of the best production scores in the model. I see names like Marvin Harrison Jr., Xavier Worthy, CeeDee Lamb, and Emeka Egbuka kind of like up right there next to him. A handful of players who put up big numbers versus good competition early on in their collegiate careers. Similar to Tate and Lemon, Jordan Tyson is also a projected top 10 to 15 pick in the NFL draft. I'm probably a little bit less confident that he stays there considering the sentiment out on him lately. I think he could go in the top 10, but it's a little less likely now than it was maybe a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, probably in the middle of the college season. There's been a lot of buzz generating lately about the injury concerns he had during his time in college. Again, this could be smoke. I heard that his medicals turned out just fine, but it's like, it's not like we haven't seen a guy drop before because there are concerns about recurring injuries. It seems to happen pretty much every single year. Personally, I'm not worried about it that much, to be honest with you. Of course, nobody likes to hear that a potential top 20 prospect has torn his ACL, MCL, PCL, meniscus, broken his collarbone, and had nagging hamstring injuries all in the span of 4 years. Nobody wants that. In fact, I bet if I just read all that off that information, you ever heard it before, you'd probably stick the injury prone tag right on him. I am just not in the business of predicting injuries, and I think it is far less meaningful at wide receiver compared to like most other positions, in my opinion. Other than injuries, I think there's plenty to like about Jordan Tyson. I just mentioned his analytical profile is probably the best in this year's class, and his film is actually quite good. He's a solid separator. He really does his best work over the intermediate part of the field on in or out breaking routes. He also wins on vertical concepts using his speed that I think is, a lot of people underrate in his game. A lot of the time he really just uses his athleticism and quick twitch to create separation. I'm no expert on evaluating wide receivers yet. I have a long way to go, but what I saw and maybe think he might need to really improve his overall ability as a route runner and expand his route tree before he reaches his true ceiling. Honestly, though, you can probably say that about most college prospects, but in Tyson's case, he's pretty raw and much more of a separator than a technician as a route runner. On a positive note, though, he is strong versus zone and quite good at finding open spots, open space against zone coverage. When the QB goes into scramble mode as well, he's quite good at that. I like his little jump cut that he uses as a release off the line. It's a strong weapon that he can always have in his back pocket. I need to dwell on Tyson's negatives because I really do think his game will translate well to fantasy. And he's going to be a good to great dynasty asset, but I do see some problems when he faces press coverage at times. I know I'm nitpicking, but I do think that, facing press coverage, getting off of press coverage, can mean a couple of different things when you're evaluating these guys and can mean a couple of different things when you talk about, the upside of their fantasy production. I wish he would just be a little bit more physical and use his hands more to keep, defensive backs from getting into his frame. Also, the kind of thing that made me leaning toward Lemon as my number two guy was Tyson's lack of ability after the catch, despite how much of a, how good of an athlete he is. He went down mostly on first contact more than I would like, and he only had 13 missed tackles forced on 159 receptions. Not the end of the world, but I do think he can improve in this area once he gets to the league. It was just a determining factor in me putting Lemon ahead. To wrap things up with Tyson, I think he is for sure in the discussion as wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 1 if you lean more towards analytics. His profile is very safe, and if he ends up going in the top 20-ish picks, maybe if he goes in the top 10, I do think he is absolutely deserving of anywhere between the 103 to the 105 in this year's rookie draft. Like most prospects, he has his flaws, but I do think his floor is a lot higher than probably people think. My pro comp for him was Calvin Ridley as a ceiling. Fun fact: these two are only separated by a couple of spots in the model. Jacoby Myers was the immediate outcome for me though, and Tyler Boyd was the floor that I had for him. Honestly, I think that can perfectly illustrate how I feel about him. If he is able to reach his ceiling, he can reach a top 5 finish in points per game like Ridley did during his prime. The athleticism is off the charts, and if you can remember, Calvin Ridley needed some polish coming out as well. Being the number 2 behind Julio Jones might have helped him out. And, why can't that be the case with Jordan Tyson? The Rams, Eagles, and Steelers come to mind. He could be the number 2 behind Devontae Smith if the Eagles, move A.J. Brown come June 1st. Same thing with DK Metcalf in Pittsburgh, even though he is at the more tail end of his career. I know they just added Michael Pittman, but I think that he could be a nice asset for them later on. It may not be, the production may not come in the first year, but later on I can see him becoming Pittsburgh's number 1. I could see the Rams taking him and having him as the third weapon behind Puka and Devontae until he eventually decides to retire, especially also as well. Like I said, Tyson's medical is checked out well, so I think that he's absolutely in play to go a little bit higher now. Of course, we want him to get opportunity right away, but I don't think it'd be the end of the world, especially in Dynasty. Regardless, I think the NFL is going to confirm my suspicion about Jordan Tyson. He's just a really, really talented wide receiver that warrants top 20 capital at the very worst, in my opinion. He's going to be an incredibly solid number 2 and has the potential to develop into a number 1. Just don't overthink him in the top 5 of your rookie drafts. A little bit of a tier break from the top 3 guys is my wide receiver 4, KC Concepcion, wide receiver out of Texas A&M. And even though my model has a decently large gap between the top 3 guys and Concepcion in terms of prospect grade, I don't believe it is as big of a gap as a lot of people, especially in the space right now, are leading on. If you have watched any of my videos recently, then you probably know how highly I think of him as a prospect and what his translation could look like to the NFL. His prospect grade came out to a 70.6. He's hovering around some nice names like A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel. He is pretty much widely considered to go night 1 of the NFL draft according to consensus big boards on PFF and mock draft database. He is also loved by not only the analytics side of Dynasty evaluators, but also film bros too. Personally, I can't say enough good things about him. He may be my wide receiver 4, but he is easily my favorite player in this entire class. He checked in at 6 foot at the combine and north of 190 pounds. He does everything you want. Separates at all 3 levels of the field, can beat zone, runs a diverse route tree, is excellent after the catch, maybe even the best in the class after the catch, and is someone that I think can play any position on the field, whether that is in the slot or as a flanker. He can play on the outside as well. He handles press coverage incredibly well for someone that is, perceived to have a smaller frame. I have him right there on par with Jordan Tyson in terms of field grade. I thought he was just as good, maybe even a little bit better. When it comes to the analytics side, he is also impressive. His production score is 52.2, which may seem underwhelming for how I'm talking him up, but he produced right away as a true freshman when he was at NC State at just 19 years old. In that season, he had over 70 catches, 800 plus receiving yards, and 10 touchdowns through the year. Not only that, but he added 320 rushing yards. This makes sense because one of his best traits is his ability after the catch. And, when he gets the ball in his hands, he is electric. He will run past you, make you miss, and he does it very, very often. He totaled 39 missed tackles forced over 3 seasons in college, which was good for a 21% missed tackles forced per reception over that span. Top of the class in that category. Not to mention, he is also one of the best returners in all college football over the past 3 seasons, which is going to make NFL teams love him even more, bring even more of a dynamic part, to an offense or to a team in general. There are quite a few people who have floated the pro comparison for Concepcion as Percy Harvin. I actually tend to agree with the sentiment and exactly why that is my ceiling comp for him in the NFL. People forget how good Percy Harvin was. The only thing that held him back was his ability to stay on the field. Injuries completely derailed his career. I do think Concepcion can be a similar player to him, and that that really lifts his ceiling in terms of putting up fantasy points and where he might be able to reach. It kind of similar with Debo Samuel. We saw him be like a running back. I don't think it's going to go that far, but kind of a similar player, just super dynamic, want to get the ball in his hands. My middling comp for him is a little less exciting, but still a damn good player in his prime. Deontay Johnson is who I'm talking about. The latter half of his career has pretty much tainted him, and he's been, of course, been a little bit of a diva in the locker room. This is probably a big reason why you don't hear his name much anymore. But people also forget how good of a player he routinely commanded 140 plus targets. He was a PPR monster. He was a top 10 finisher in points per game in 2021 as well, like 17, almost 18 points per game. To me, Concepcion is this type of player consistently as a medium comp, just without the baggage that came with Deontay Johnson, of course. My floor comp is Hollywood Brown, a productive fantasy asset like pretty much throughout his entire career. He just never hit his absolute ceiling. He was never truly able to get there. This floor should signal to people that, just how high I am on Concepcion and what his range of outcomes could be in the NFL. I think he is absolutely worthy of the 106 to 107 in rookie drafts when it's all said and done. I think he's going to land there no matter what. I can even see him passing up a guy like Jordan Tyson if he is selected ahead of him in the landing spot and better. He is that talented. I find it very difficult to find negative in Concepcion's profile. Maybe the one thing that people have brought up the most is his hands, and they can be a little bit unreliable at times. That's a valid concern. 19 drops in 3 seasons is not something you want to see. That is something that I think can easily improve, though. A lot of it is technique. It can be fixed with some coaching. And while I understand this concern, I really don't care about drops as much as other people. I really, really don't, especially when we were talking about someone who gets open at the level that Concepcion does. He destroys man coverage. He's good against zone. The closer we get to the NFL draft, though, the more that steam it seems like he is getting. If you haven't noticed yet, you probably should take notice. Make sure you know the name. He is one of the best wide receivers in this draft, and someone you should, count on being a fantastic mid-round rookie pick. You should be absolutely happy with, and a dynasty asset that has wide receiver 1 potential, no matter the landing spot. My wide receiver 5 is someone that I think very highly of, and I really think people should be excited about. He falls right into the same tier as Concepcion, and that is Omar Cooper Jr., one of the 2 wide receivers that declared for the draft after winning the national championship with Indiana. He has been on quite the rocket ship of draft boards at the moment. He is now projected to be selected, and round 1 has climbed all the way up to number 34 in mock draft database and number 27 on the PFF big board. I've seen him as high as wide receiver 3 off the board in mock drafts. And after this, it is hard to imagine him not going on 1. He has an incredible amount of strengths, and most of them are really catered to what we like in fantasy football. During his 3 years at Indiana, he played a lot in the slot, especially this past season. Indiana definitely used, him to their advantage in the offense. There was a lot of screens, plays at or behind the line of scrimmage so that he could use his ability in space. This is easily his best asset. He is fantastic after the catch. This past season, he had 24 missed tackles forced. And if you've ever watched his tape, he is always throwing defenders off of him, making dudes miss in the open field. I know the Indiana offense isn't always the best example of an NFL offense, NFL style offense. They were very RPO heavy at times, and it definitely benefited Omar Cooper. However, he can do so much more than just catch these bubble screens, catch these slants on RPOs. There were so many times that he was able to show off his ability to separate on deeper patterns, over the middle, on outbreaking routes, or even when he got vertical down the field in the slot. He is so incredibly twitched up, super twitchy, and it caught me off guard when I was watching his tape because I did not expect that. Honestly, he had a ton of Luther Burden in him from last year's class, dangerous after the catch, and just moves differently. His ball skills were even underrated, and his body control is phenomenal. I'm sure everyone has seen the catch versus Penn State in the back of the end zone. If you haven't, just go take a look. Just go watch it. There are very few athletes, very few players in college, especially that can contort their body the way that he does. It's almost like he has like rubber limbs. I don't know how to explain it really, but the way he eludes defenders, throws shoes off of them, like makes these crazy sideline, toe tapping catches. Whatever it is, Omar Cooper can pretty much do it all, in my opinion, and that is exactly why he is getting the first round buzz that he is getting. There is a ton, like I just mentioned, to love about Cooper's game. I even think his analytics profile checks out too, even though they aren't as strong as some of the other, top guys or the guys at the top of the class. He had just below a 50 production score, the 5th best film grade at 6.43, which totaled up to a 68.2 prospect grade. That's good for 6 in the class. I think that checks out pretty well in my model. This grade is right on par with guys like T. Higgins, Josh Downs. Another positive I want to add is something that I think has become less and less common, from prospects who, over the past couple of years, and that is early declare. Ever since NIL came into effect, it has changed things a lot, quite a bit. And a ton of prospects end up going back for their senior season because they're going to earn a couple of $1 million. And why not just come out the next year, especially if they don't feel like they're ready? In last year's class, we had just one of them at the very top, and it was Ted McMillan, Emeka Egbuka, Travis Hunter, and Matthew Golden. They were all fourth-year guys. This year, my top 5 wide receivers in this class are all early declares, and that includes Omar Cooper. Now more than ever, a prospect declaring early is an even bigger sign that they will probably get high draft capital, and that makes the NFL, and probably the NFL, thinks very highly of them. Now, while I do feel like, I laid out a ton of great things about Cooper, like most, of course, he isn't perfect. Despite showing off some of the best single reps in this class, it does get a little inconsistent at times. You almost get frustrated, that he didn't shred Big Ten defenses weekly based on the way he looked at times, based on the way he moves, the way he separates. Maybe it was just the way Indiana spread the ball around. I know they had Elijah Surratt there. They had also another guy, forgot his name. I forget Charlie something, but he's probably going to be taking the next year's class. I just think it's a fair criticism to come away, just wanting more from his tape. He also has the tendency to sometimes round off his routes at times, and you would really like it to be a little more crispy in certain areas. I've said this before about guys like Jordan Tyson, but he is much more of a separated than anything else. Anything else close to a technician or a polished route runner. I get a lot of guys aren't out of college, but I think it's a criticism that I think is very fair. He heavily relies on his physical, athletic tools, which isn't a bad thing. But he has some things to clean up before he can reach his ceiling. But I think having that athleticism, having that, those physical tools, gives him some time to, kind of make up for it in that area and excel early on despite not being super, super polished. At the end of the day, I do agree with the people who think he's going to be an incredibly productive pro. Like I mentioned, he is also, the exact archetype that we want in fantasy. He reminds me a ton of Luther Burden, but honestly, he has a lot of DJ Moore in him. That is probably what I believe his ceiling comp is. I have Jaden Reed there as a median comp as well. A really solid NFL player that I think, has a lot more juice left to be squeezed in his game. We just haven't seen it in Green Bay just yet. Sterling Shepard is the floor. I would say that isn't too bad of a trio there. Assuming Cooper goes in round 1 or early round 2, I would be more than comfortable taking him, anywhere between the 108 to the 110, depending on the landing spot. His profile is more than worthy of it. I envision him being a really fun asset to own in Dynasty for a long time, especially if he lands in a spot where the team can weaponize his skills in the best possible way. Speaking of, let's do that for a second. Just for fun, I think it'd be cool to talk about some potential landing spots that could realistically happen if he is taken in round 1 on night 1. A few that stand out to me is the Dolphins at 11th overall or the Rams at 13th overall. And I get it. That may seem high, but I think it's his potential ceiling. The Dolphins just signed Malik Willis to a big deal, and giving him another weapon across from Jalen Waddle might be a good way to aid him, help him in his first year as a starter. As far as the Rams go, Devontae Adams is 33. He will be 34 in December. Plus, Omar Cooper is the exact type of wide receiver that Sean McVay covets, the type that he loves, tough, gritty, unselfish, does not have a big ego. Another one is the Eagles at 23. AJ Brown could potentially be moved, and he could step in as the number 2. And like I just mentioned, selfish, tough, gritty, seems to be everything that the Eagles love as well. I also wouldn't put it past the 49ers. I know they just signed Mike Evans, but he will be 33 in August. It's maybe just a one-year deal, and adding another weapon never hurts. We know how good Kyle Shanahan is at weaponizing players like Omar Cooper. We saw him do it with Deebo Samuel for many years. I would love that landing spot. Some others would be the Broncos at 30 and the Patriots at 31. Both can improve their wide receiver rooms a ton by adding Cooper in the draft. I want to conclude with this. Even though I have one more guy inside of tier 2 who we'll talk about here in a second, I feel very, very, very confident about my top 5. I'll talk about that a lot throughout the video. They are all worthy of either early or mid-round rookie picks, and I think that we can see that come to fruition. I think that we will see that come to fruition when the NFL draft concludes and people actually get on the clock and we have all the information that we need. Omar Cooper Jr. will be a part of this. I'm almost certain, and I cannot wait to see where he eventually ends up going, who eventually takes him on night 1 of the NFL draft. The next 2 wide receivers on my list are quite possibly the hardest evaluations I faced when I was putting this ranking together. Honestly, I thought pretty hard about having them switch places and went back and forth a bunch. Ultimately, though, I went ahead and decided to trust the NFL and the projected draft capital and also my model. This is what helped me push Denzel Boston, the wide receiver out of Washington, ahead as my wide receiver 6 in this class. Before we go any further, I do believe that there's a tier break probably between Boston and the 2 other wide receivers I have ranked ahead of him, Omar Cooper and Casey Concepcion. I know that's probably just in my head, though. That is in my head in general. They're in the same tier in the prospect model. I just want to put that out there. But I will get into why I found him such a tough evaluation. But let's talk a little bit about Boston and some of the positive things that I think he brings as a prospect. For starters, the dude's a large human. He measured in at 6'4", over 210 pounds for the combine. I know he didn't run, but the guy has a massive wingspan with a 32-inch arms, almost 10-inch hands. Every single bit of his length and strength shows up on his tape. Don't envision him having a tough time handling the physicality that the NFL brings. He came in with a solid 69 prospect grade. That's why I pushed him ahead of the next guy on here. You'll probably see the difference in the grades, but this is right on par with guys like Michael Pittman Jr. and Jaden Higgins from last year's draft class. Something that stood out the most about Boston was how much of a monster he was in the contested catch game in 2025. He had a 77 contested catch percentage, which I think he was like 10 for 15. That is elite and shows how great he is in that area. He was pretty heavily used downfield as a downfield presence vertically, and he was quite good in that role despite the limitations that the Washington QB had in that area. I can't remember. I believe it was Devon Williams, but I think that really goes unnoticed, especially for those who just like Boston as a prospect. His QB play was pretty subpar, and he wasn't really given much of a chance a lot of the time. I just also think that I don't think he was weaponized in the most correct way. I'm not like a perfect, evaluator. I don't think that anybody should take my opinion for certain, but I do think that he was utilized in a weird way at Washington. Not in the way that I would expect or that you would expect a guy to be deployed like him, but another thing that I love about Boston is the dude has a knack for the end zone. He had 20 touchdowns over the past 2 seasons, and that's with him being banged up and missing a few games in that span. With his size, you would probably expect him to do this, of course, but sometimes it always isn't always the case. We have seen that over the past couple of years. His ability to beat press isn't perfect, but I do think he does it well. As he continues to get better and better, I do think his ability versus press will follow. I've heard great things about his character, so I don't doubt that he's going to work hard to polish his games in that area. I really do think he's going to be a super duper solid outside X wide receiver in the NFL for whoever takes him in round one. I believe he's probably going to go in round one. I think it is pretty much consensus at that point that he goes round one. Maybe he doesn't. Although a lot can happen, I guess it isn't a lock, but I believe he has as good of a chance as anyone after the top three guys. While there isn't a question about Boston's translation to the NFL as a starting X, I do think there are valid questions about just how high his ceiling is going to be in fantasy. He isn't exactly a player that is going to translate directly to scoring a ton of fantasy points right off the bat. I could be wrong, but outside of scoring double-digit touchdowns, he isn't a guy I see commanding 130, 140 targets per season. A large part of this comes from, my questions about his ability to consistently separate. A lot of other people's, questions about him to consistently separate. He isn't the most explosive athlete as well and struggles to get in and out of his breaks at times, despite returning punts. And I didn't know this, but the guy who returned punts in college, I think that was a little bit odd. I might have to go back and check that out because I didn't see him change direction like incredibly well at times, and maybe I'm underrating it slightly. This is normal for players his size, though, to not get out of breaks well, not being able to, throttle down the greatest. But even on patterns where he's working over the middle, he tends to struggle more than I would like to see. I think defenses are going to find it easier to take a player like him away because of his weaknesses in his game. He is not going to be like the guy who can catch underneath passes and take it to the house for 50, 60 yards. I think he can absolutely improve as a route runner and as an overall separator. But based off what I've seen currently, I tend to have lower expectations. He also doesn't have much of an impact after the catch. A lot of the time he goes down on first contact, and he only had 15 total missed tackles forced over his 4 years at Washington. That is why I'm not shy at all about pushing Casey Concepcion, Omar Cooper ahead of him. They are electric after the catch and can separate at a much higher level, in my opinion. Not to mention they are likely to be moved around the formation quite a bit, and they're just seen as a little bit more versatile. Boston is more than likely going to be subjected to an outside X role unless he goes to a situation where the coach is super creative and won't stick him in just one spot, because I know that can be frustrating at times. We've seen it with a couple of guys who are just big bodies that just thrown on the outside and asked to just go win. Boston's production score is also a little underwhelming at just 45.4. It's easily the, I think, second lowest, or it's the lowest of the guys who are projected to go in the first round of the of wide receivers in this class. It might give people some worry about his game translating gracefully to the NFL. His archetype ceiling is more around the Cortland Suttons of the world, a big body wide receiver who can play on the outside, win contested catches, and be a red zone threat. This isn't an indictment on him as a prospect. Sutton is an incredibly productive fantasy player pretty much every single year, pretty much has been his entire career. The only thing is that the ceiling just hasn't been there, and I don't think he separates well enough to justify giving him a higher range of outcomes than this. I am more than comfortable, though, using my 109, maybe even 108, but probably 109 to 112 rookie pick on him if I am in the clock in that range. Boston has flaws in his profile. His ability to separate and be a consistent fantasy contributor are questions. He may be more volatile and touchdown dependent on a week to week basis, like Cortland Sutton is, but I do think his profile has some really nice positives. The NFL seems to value his potential role at the next level. He's projected 32 pick. He is a projected, top 32 pick on mock draft database and on the PFF big board. He also seems to do most things quite well that a high level starting X wide receiver does in the NFL. Wins contested catches, has good body control, reliable hands, bullies defenders with his size, which we like to see. Nobody can really argue with that. He moves quite well for his size at times too. And if he continues to improve as a player, I do think, guys like Cortland Sutton, Michael Pittman Jr. are more than likely in his range of outcomes. There's an audience of analysts that like to give Denzel Boston the Keon Coleman comp. I do not fall into this group at all. People aren't exactly going to be head over heels about some of these comparisons, about the comps that I gave him, because everybody wants the next Jamar Chase or CeeDee Lamb. I do think, though, that Denzel Boston gives you wide receiver 2 in fantasy and top 24 upside on a yearly basis. If he is able to go to a pretty good situation as a wide receiver 6 in a draft class, I would say that is a huge win. And, honestly, I think it's more than valid to be, grabbing him anywhere from the 109 to the 112, like I mentioned. Next, we have the guy that I kind of wanted to put pretty badly ahead of Denzel Boston, just based on the potential ceiling that he may have, and that is the other Indiana wide receiver, Elijah Surratt. I didn't, though, based on the prospect model grade and just how the NFL views these guys in terms of, how widely they are viewed apart in terms of where they are probably going to go. Denzel Boston, of course, is viewed as a round 1 guy. Elijah Surratt, probably a day 2 guy for sure. And I'll explain more of that soon, kind of talking about his ceiling, but coming in with a 60.2 prospect grade, Surratt's comps in the model lineup with players like Cedric Tillman, Michael Thomas, Adonai Mitchell. Those 3 players pretty much tell you all that you need to know about Surratt and how people view him currently in the space. He is kind of either loved or maybe even hated by most evaluators. Maybe I shouldn't say hated. That's probably a little harsh, but I do think it's fair to point out that there are a lot of people out there who were not high on Surratt and what his translation looks like at the next level. And I want to get the ugly part out of the way because I think it is an absolutely fair point to point out his flaws, warn people why his game may not be the most translatable to the NFL, to the next level, and especially in fantasy football. He doesn't separate at a very high level. He lacks the speed to, be able to win on the outside, push defenses vertically, and that is something you just don't want to see. He measured in at 6'2.5" and 210 pounds at the combine. And for some, this may scream outside X wide receiver. And if you watch his tape at Indiana, there were a lot of back shoulder timing throws, heavy RPO style scheme plays at times. This hasn't exactly translated very well to the NFL in the past. I didn't even get to mention that he will turn 23 years old a month after the NFL draft. And I totally get the hesitation to be out on this type of prospect. A lot of the time, it doesn't pan out, and that's where we get Terrace Marshalls of the world. Keon Coleman is like the most recent version of it. It's a dice roll for sure. Even while acknowledging these things, though, I do have more optimism than most that Surratt, as a prospect, I do have a lot more confidence in him, and I see the strength. I see some strength in his game that a lot of people may be overlooking in his profile. First thing I want to get straight is that I think that there's a clear way or a clear, path that Surratt just straight up fails at the next level. Not just for Dynasty or Fantasy, but as a real life wide receiver in general. If a team decides to stick him outside as an X and tell him to go win versus press, win contested catches, or be like a field stretcher down the field, it will go downhill pretty quick. He lacks the speed and the ability to push defenses vertically, like I mentioned. The only role that would fit him the best or the role that I think would fit him the best is either as a flanker, where they can move him around the formation, hide some of his weaknesses. More intriguingly, though, I think he would be best weaponized as a power slot, similar to how guys like Keenan Allen had been used throughout their career. And this may seem out there, but I really do think that Keenan Allen is in Elijah Surratt's range of outcomes. And before you freak out, let me explain, because one of the wildest things that stood out to me when I was watching his tape was his ability to separate and operate in small windows, short areas of the field. It was so odd. On patterns like slants, shorter in, outbreaking routes, he was exceptionally good. His releases were good off the line. He was quick. He created separation early. He was also very underrated, after the catch. Despite only forcing 9 missed tackles in 2025 and having just a 4.8 yak per reception, he was so tough to bring down out in space, and I think a lot of that got masked by the offense he was in. He not only broke tackles by just sheer will and physicality, but he also had way more wiggle, made more people miss than I ever thought he would. Most of this is, I think why his after the catch numbers were so down was because of the role that he played in that Indiana offense. Like we mentioned earlier, was a lot of the back shoulder throws that never allowed him to create, separation after the catch, or never allowed him to create room after the catch. I truly believe that the absolute ceiling for him, and trust me, I know that this is maybe a small range of outcomes where he reaches this, but if he goes to the right place, I think Keenan Allen, Jarvis Landry, Michael Thomas, who is actually his closest comparison in the model, and like Elijah Surratt, all these guys were not great athletes either, and were the ultimate versions of that power slot role in the NFL. Michael Thomas ran a 4.57 at the combine, which is the best of the three guys here that I'm going to talk about. Keenan Allen apparently ran a 4.7 or in the 4.7s at his pro day when he was coming out, I believe, at a Cal like years ago. And Jarvis Landry, has probably the worst testing measurables I have ever seen recorded at the combine. I'll throw it up here on the screen, but dude, this is horrendous. And I don't think that Surratt would have tested this bad, but this just shows that athleticism and testing numbers at the combine have to be the most overrated variable for the wide receiver position specifically. This is exactly why I could care less why Surratt didn't run at the combine or do any of the testing. I mean, really, why would he? The NFL was going to ding him either way, and I just think it would have probably hurt his draft stock more than anything. I am predicting he is selected around the top 50, but most likely probably the top 60 to 70 picks. But I would not be surprised if a team decides to draft him in the top 50 if the Raiders try to pair him with um, Fernando Mendoza at the top of the second round. He is ranked in that range on both mock draft database though and the PFF big board around that 60 to 70 range. His landing spot is going to mean so much more than any other wide receiver in this class. The organization and scheme that he falls into will matter a ton. If he is taken by a team that is proven to be incompetent in the past or has an elite slot wide receiver already, I'm going to be pretty down on him actually reaching that ceiling that I just laid out. It is a risky type of prospect to bet on, but the ceiling, in my opinion, is so exciting. I love it. Surratt has done nothing but get better and better and better every single season since starting his career at St. Francis University, and he ended his career as a national championship at Indiana this past year. A lot of people I know won't feel the same way about him that I do, but it's worth a shot to at least envision the possibility if you were a little bit down on him. I'm hoping to open your minds just a little bit. I anticipate he will be a big topic of debate as we get closer to the draft in April, and I'm looking forward to it. Surratt is my wide receiver 7, and I think his range of outcomes are much wider than people thought. I envision him being in the early second round discussion of rookie drafts, maybe a late first, but likely like the 201 to the 203, maybe even 205. It's a range I can see probably the next couple of guys from my wide receiver 7 and wide receiver 10 going in that range. They fall into the same tier anyways, and I think the landing spot will be the determining factor at the end of the day on Surratt, and I'm really, really excited to see where he ends up. Sticking in this tier with Surratt is my wide receiver 8, Chris Bell, the wide receiver out of Louisville. If I'm being honest, he would probably have been a lot higher if he had not torn his ACL at the end of the season. He was routinely mocked inside the first round for most of the college season before he went down, and I really don't think that would have changed if the injury hadn't occurred. Unfortunately, though, it did, and now we're looking at him going around more the top 50 range, which will put him comfortably inside the second round. Bell comes in, though, with a 59.8 prospect grade, a 41.6 production score, and a 6.34 film grade. Not the most eye-popping numbers in the world, but I did like his film quite a bit, so that's why it's a little bit higher. It's worth mentioning that he is a big dude. He measured in at 6'2", 222 pounds at the combine, which is quite hefty for a wide receiver at his height. It makes sense, though, if you have ever seen him play. The dude's jacked. He's massive. What I really liked about Bell, though, was, when I was watching this film, was his willingness to actually use his physical frame. We see it so much where a player has superior physical traits than other guys, but doesn't ever use them on the field. They come at the combine, like show out big time, but you never see it on tape. He was not shy at all to hand fight or even use his body to create some separation at the top of his route. Some may see this and think that it's probably not going to work at the next level. He's not going to be as physically imposing to other NFL corners, and that's probably true. They have, the best technique in the world. They have the strength to combat some of these type of wide receivers. However, though, I do think his physicality mixed with the athleticism, he possesses will help buy him some time so that he can grow as an overall separator and route runner. A lot of the routes he won on at Louisville were slants, digs, curls. He ran a very simple route tree and is going to need some time to develop, and I predict is probably not going to be the prettiest in his rookie season, especially coming off the torn ACL, being a little bit more raw than others. We might have to wait until year 2 or even year 3 before he really see him start producing, putting up some numbers. He isn't the greatest separator at the moment. He struggled at times to gear down and get in and out of his breaks at times. I do think he's much, much better than a lot of people like probably say or probably think. It's going to take some time, and I think that's just, the brutal truth of it. I could be wrong, but that's just from what I saw on film. Maybe it was the simple route tree. Maybe we didn't get to see him do everything that he could possibly do, on the field. He might need to be utilized in a certain way at first, though, in order to get the most out of him until he really comes into his own. For fantasy purposes, though, I do believe in that, in the right system, he can be used in a similar way to how we saw Michael Wilson be used this past year in Arizona. Bigger bodies, physical, can move around the formation, play the slot, play the flanker. He can move on the outside. He can stretch the field. He's got good enough speed. And if you can remember Michael Wilson coming out of Stanford a couple of years ago, he was a little bit more raw, and it took him 3 seasons before we saw it all come together. I think Bell is a better prospect than Michael Wilson was, but I think the ceiling can look similar than it, to now how it does in the NFL to what Michael Wilson is as a player right now. Chris Bell is going to be someone that people aren't paying as much attention to, with the ACL not allowing him to compete at the combine and not being in first round consideration anymore. He could go under the radar. I think this could be even more true once the NFL season starts. He likely won't play much or could start the season on the PUP list. We kind of just don't know at the moment, but I think this, in the right landing spot, he's going to have a chance to really be a guy who rises up rankings coming, 2027, coming, next offseason when we get a little more clarity about his health and when we really see him get on the field like in a full-time role. I'm not saying it's impossible. He could sneak into round one. I kind of doubt it though. With the injury, teams may back out off it a little bit. It's kind of quite a bit of money to give to a guy who may be missing most of his first year. But I see early second round is a great spot for him to come off the board. Tons of teams in that range could take him. I'm looking at guys or teams like the Jets who own the first pick of the second round. The Raiders could use some help there too. Outside of Brock Bowers, it is like a whole lot of unknown at the wide receiver position. The Giants will be a great spot as well. They just lost Wan'Dale Robinson in free agency and could use someone else across from Malik Neighbors to help Jackson Dart. I think the Saints, Dolphins, Falcons, Browns are all possibilities as well. All have picks inside the top 50 that they could use on him. Overall, I am not as high as some people are on Chris Bell. I have seen the A.J. Brown comparison and thrown around some places, and I am just really, really not into that. I think A.J. Brown was so much better coming out of college, in my opinion. He went in the second round as well, but I think a lot of people looking back now, like why wasn't A.J. Brown taken in the first round? That feels like a stretch to me, but you never know. I guess he could become A.J. Brown. He could develop into him, but you know, to sum up my thoughts here, I do think that Bell warrants a spot inside my top 10. Of course, he is here at the number 8 spot and will be a sneaky selection early in the second round of rookie drafts. You may have to wait on him a little bit, but somewhere in the 201 to 205 range feels like a reasonable prediction and where I would be comfortable taking him. My wide receiver 9 is Jerry Bernard, wide receiver out of Alabama, 4-year player who transferred from Michigan State after his freshman year and then went over to the University of Washington. He actually came over with Kalen DeBoer, who is the head coach at Alabama right now, and played his last 2 seasons there. I just want to point out, he played with a ton of great competition throughout college. He was on the same Michigan State team as Keon Coleman and Jaden Reed, both second-round picks in the NFL draft. He was with the trio of Washington wide receivers that got taken a couple years ago in Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, a first, second, and fourth round, picks in the NFL draft. And his last 2 seasons, he played next to Ryan Williams, one of the better prospects to come out in the last couple of years, who is someone I expect to be going in round 1, round 2 consideration whenever he declares. This gave him a nice bump in the teammate grade category, and when he probably had one of the highest in the class, probably right behind Carnell Tate. He finished with a 63.2 prospect grade, very solid, a 51.3 production score, not bad either, and came with a 6.3 film grade. This was the lowest of anyone inside my top 10, but it doesn't mean I think he's a bad player at all. I just want to point that out. I really just think it came down to what I envisioned his ceiling being in the NFL. He does a lot of things well, but nothing like super exceptional. The one thing you can probably point to, though, is his ability after the catch. He had 17 missed tackles forced this past year, was one of the best in the class, and had 28 over the past 2 seasons at Alabama. He's just pretty well at creating and does a good job of just bouncing off the defenders in the open field. He's a pretty big body. He's over 200 pounds, I believe 6'1". He's an okay separator, and I do think his ability to get in and out of breaks holds him back at times. I was just hoping for more when I watched his tape, and that's really all it is. He does have a very high floor in the NFL, in my opinion, though. He screams number 2 wide receiver, and I don't think he ever becomes a number 1, though, unless it's a system that really caters to his strengths, and it's kind of just comes down to him being, the best option there. I have the ceiling come down as Rashee Rice. And I know a lot of people may think, oh, wow, that's a high bar. That's a pretty high bar. But the biggest reason why Rice has been so good at fantasy is because of the Chiefs system. I don't think it's necessarily just based on how talented he is in general. And it helps when you have Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. Let's just be honest. I don't think he would be remotely close to the same player if he landed, almost anywhere else. And this is kind of how I view Jeremy Bernard. Maybe more realistic comparison is the median one I have for him, and that's Romeo Dobbs. This isn't going to excite anyone, but man, dude, Dobbs is incredibly underrated. He's so disrespected. I see it all the time. He also just got a massive payday from the Patriots, and we will see what, number one, number two wide receiver volume looks like for him. Now, I could be totally wrong about Bernard, but some people have him a lot higher. I do. I totally get it in that case. I know he's probably a safe player. Maybe some people see it like a higher like ceiling for him. In fantasy, I just want the guy who's going to be scoring more points, who has the higher ceiling. And yeah, I tend to steer more towards guys who have higher upside. And for better or worse, I sometimes probably discount the guys who have a higher floor than others. I do think though that he could flash a lot earlier than some of the other guys maybe ranked ahead of him inside the top 10. But, the ceiling just it isn't there for me at the end of the day. I do think he is more than worthy of a mid to early run second round pick in, a little bit of a little bit of a, I guess the nice way to say it, a little bit of a weaker rookie draft in terms of depth wise. This being like the 201 to the 205 range. I mentioned earlier, like with Surratt and Bell, where I think they're going to be drafted around. I think he's absolutely in that discussion. He also has the real life draft capital thing going for him as well. He is a projected second rounder, ranked as the 49th and 58th best player on the PFF and mock draft database big board. I think NFL teams like the idea of him. He does a lot of things that they love. He blocks, but a lot of things that a lot of these things don't contribute much to fantasy at all. I struggle putting him a spot lower in my rankings. I did want to give the edge though to him just based on the floor. I wanted to respect it a little bit, and that is why I have Jeremy Bernard inside my top 10 and not at number 10. Good player, just not great and not super high on what his ceiling could potentially be in Dynasty or fantasy football. Rounding out my top 10 wide receivers is Chris Brazzell, wide receiver out of the University of Tennessee. Now, let me get something straight before I go any further. There has been quite the debate on the translation of the Tennessee wide receivers to the NFL. The University of Tennessee, we have seen quite, a couple of duds over the past couple of years. Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, Bayless Jones, and I know the book isn't written on him yet, but Dante Thornton was taken in the early fourth round of last year's draft. And it hasn't looked great yet, especially for fantasy football. I want to make it known that I do not think Brazzell falls into this group. I really, really do not. He feels like much more of an outlier, much different of a prospect. And a lot of the prospects that I just mentioned really benefited from the Tennessee offense. If you ever watched it before, if you've ever watched the University of Tennessee offense before, it is the most Mickey Mouse offense I have ever seen. It takes advantage of the wide hashes, spreads defenses out in a way that quite literally cannot happen in the NFL. It helps, get the wide receivers a ton of free releases and doesn't require them to create separation on their own a lot of the time. I thought this was going to be the case with Brown, so I kind of went in helmet scouting. I realized pretty quickly that he was different. His ability at 6'4" to get in and out of his breaks, stop on a dime, change directions was so impressive. I was shocked and was especially intrigued when he wasn't just running straight down the field and had to create separation in real one-on-one situations. He even showed a good ability against zone coverage, underrated ability. I really like to pay attention to these things. They don't tend to matter as much for outside wide receivers like Brazzell, but it could be good indication that he can be moved around the formation more and is able to recognize the defenses at a higher level than I initially thought. Of course, we all know he has great speed. At the NFL Combine, he ran a ridiculous 4.37 40-yard dash. I saw good speed on tape, but didn't see that type of juice. I'm going to be completely honest with you. He is clearly going to excel on the outside and be able to stretch defenses vertically down the field. His ball skills are actually quite good, very, very good. You see it pop up against good competition as well, which mixes well with his length, allows him to win contested catches at a pretty high rate. He reminded me a lot of Alec Pierce currently in the NFL, and that is the ceiling comp that I have for him. Both match up pretty well comparably in the measurement department and tested similarly as well. I think he can do more than just run vertical and stretch a defense, but it's going to be up to the organization that selects him, and that is why I have him a bit lower. I am more worried about whoever decides to take Brazzell, and I think that they may just pigeonhole him to this field stretcher. He's just going to be running wind sprints, every other game, and I don't love that, especially in fantasy football. At the end of the day, I don't, it doesn't matter what I think. I can envision scenarios for him all day. I can envision a ceiling for him all day, but it's up to the team that drafts him that is going to decide his role. His 60.3 prospect grade matches up with similar guys, or I guess to some of the players who are ranked ahead of him. You'll see guys like Jaden Reed, Chris Godwin, Terrace Marshall. So kind of a wide range of outcomes for him. His production score is also the lowest of anyone inside the top 10 by a wide margin at just 36.8. pretty low, not great. While I think the ceiling can get anywhere from Alec Pierce to Christian Watson, I just don't love the role that he could potentially be playing in the NFL. It doesn't always translate to fantasy the greatest and is a very, very, very volatile archetype. I don't want people to think that I am helmet scouting, completely taking out, the fact that he went to Tennessee. I believe a lot of the concerns I just laid out are something that signifies or that significantly dips how I view him translating to the next level, at least in fantasy. I think fantasy more than anything, I'm a little bit worried. A super fun prospect though, but volatile and a bit shaky in some areas. So that concludes my top 10 wide receivers in the 2026 rookie class and how I view them translating to fantasy, how I view them potentially being valued in Dynasty, and what I think are the most realistic outcomes based on everything in their profile. If you take anything from this video, I hope it's that this wide receiver class is very damn good. Excuse my language a little bit, but the top 5 is incredibly strong. And I think that there are multiple profiles after that that could really shake things up. When we look back on it a couple of years from now, maybe, it changes a little bit. But I hope this helped you. I hope it gave you a better idea. Maybe help you open your mind, help just basically kind of helping you a little bit before you get on the clock in your rookie drafts. I predict probably that the order might change a bit once we get landing spots and everything, but I feel overall confident in how I have them ranked now. With just about 6 weeks to go, it's going to be really interesting to see how things change, see how things shake up, and what players start to rise or fall as we get closer or after the NFL draft. In the meantime, though, stay well. Like always, I will see you guys next time.